The rain hammered against the cracked pavement of downtown Detroit as Marcus Chen felt his way along the familiar route to the subway station. His white cane tapped rhythmically against the concrete, a sound that had become his compass through a world of perpetual darkness for the past 15 years. What Marcus didn't know was that today would change everything, not just for him, but for the two desperate teenagers watching him from across the street, their stomachs empty and their hearts heavy with the weight of survival. Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, I share incredible true stories that will leave you speechless. Today's story is about two twins who made a decision that would change their lives forever. Before we dive in, please hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. It really helps me reach my goal of 10,000 subscribers. And trust me, you won't want to miss any of these amazing stories I share every week. Marcus Chen hadn't always been blind. 15 years ago, he was one of the most successful tech entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley, worth over $2 billion. His company, Chen Technologies, had revolutionized cloud computing infrastructure, making him one of the youngest billionaires in America. Magazine covers featured his confident smile, business schools taught case studies on his innovative strategies, and competitors both feared and respected his ability to predict market trends. But success came at a cost he never saw coming. Marcus had built his empire alongside his college sweetheart, Sarah Martinez, whom he'd married in a lavish ceremony overlooking the Pacific Ocean. Sarah wasn't just his wife, she was his business partner, his creative counterpart, and his anchor in a world that moved at breakneck speed. While Marcus focused on the technical innovations, Sarah handled the human side of the business, employee relations, company culture, and the philanthropic initiatives that made Chen Technologies more than just another tech giant. Their penthouse apartment in San Francisco was filled with prototypes, business plans, and dreams of changing the world. They worked 18-hour days, fueled by ambition and love, building something that would outlast them both. The irony wasn't lost on Marcus now. They had been so focused on building a legacy that they almost missed the most important legacy of all. When Sarah announced she was pregnant with twins, everything changed. Suddenly, the company wasn't just about innovation, it was about creating a world worth inheriting. Marcus threw himself into preparing for fatherhood with the same intensity he brought to everything else, reading every parenting book, designing the perfect nursery, and planning for a future where he could balance being a CEO and a dad. The night everything changed, Marcus was driving home from his company's IPO celebration. Chen Technologies had just gone public, making him worth $2.3 billion on paper. The champagne still buzzed in his system as he took a call from his attorney about some urgent paperwork regarding the company's charitable foundation, Sarah's pet project to provide technology education to underprivileged children. He never saw the drunk driver run the red light. The accident didn't just take his sight, it took everything. His wife, Sarah, 7 months pregnant with twins, died on impact despite the paramedics' best efforts. The trauma of losing his family, combined with his newfound blindness and the traumatic brain injury that came with it, sent Marcus spiraling into a darkness deeper than anything his damaged eyes could comprehend. The first few months after the accident were a blur of surgeries, rehabilitation, and grief counseling that barely scratched the surface of his pain. The media covered the tragedy extensively. Tech mogul loses everything in tragic accident. But they couldn't capture the depth of his loss. Board members offered their condolences while quietly discussing succession plans. Friends and colleagues visited initially, but their discomfort with his blindness and grief eventually drove them away. Unable to cope with the memories that haunted every corner of his former life, Marcus made a decision that shocked everyone who knew him. He liquidated most of his assets, put his fortune into a blind trust managed by his attorney with strict instructions, and disappeared. He assumed a new identity, Marcus Thompson, moved to Detroit, and lived off a modest monthly allowance from his trust. It was enough to survive, but nothing that would draw attention to his true identity or his past. What Marcus didn't know, what the hospital staff, overwhelmed by the chaos of that terrible night, had failed to tell him clearly, was that Sarah had given birth before she died. The twins, a boy and girl, survived the crash through an emergency C-section performed in a desperate attempt to save them. Named Jake and Emma by the state when no family could be located, they were placed into the foster care system while Marcus lay in a coma for 6 months, fighting for his life and unaware that his children were alive and waiting for someone to claim them. 16 years later, Jake and Emma Thompson lived in a different kind of darkness. At 17, they had aged out of their last foster home and found themselves on the streets of Detroit, surviving day by day in a city that seemed to have forgotten them. Their journey through the foster care system had been particularly brutal. Because they were twins and older children, finding families willing to take both of them together had been nearly impossible. They'd been separated 3 times in their early years, each separation traumatic and devastating. Jake, the older twin by 12 minutes, had learned early that his primary job was protecting Emma, even when they were in different homes. Jake was tall and lean with dark hair and eyes that held wisdom far beyond his years. His body bore the scars of his journey: a crooked nose from a foster father's backhand when he was 12, a scar on his left hand from working in an illegal scrap metal operation when he was 14, and the lean build of someone who'd never had consistent meals. He'd learned to be hypervigilant, always scanning for threats, always planning escape routes, always ready to fight or run, depending on what the situation demanded. Emma was smaller, with the same dark hair but eyes that somehow still held hope, despite everything they'd endured. She had her own scars, emotional ones mostly, though the small scar on her chin was from a fall while running away from a particularly abusive foster situation when she was 10. Emma had become the keeper of their shared history, remembering details Jake forced himself to forget, maintaining the hope that Jake couldn't afford to hold on to. Their last foster family, the Johnsons, had seemed promising at first. Mr. Johnson was a mechanic who taught Jake about cars, and Mrs. Johnson was kind to Emma, even teaching her to bake. But when Mr. Johnson lost his job and started drinking heavily, the household became volatile. Mrs. Johnson, overwhelmed and scared, asked the state to remove the twins when Jake turned 16 and was getting too big for her husband to intimidate. At 17, they were officially too old for traditional foster care. They'd been placed in a transitional living program, but budget cuts had closed the facility unexpectedly, leaving dozens of teens scrambling for alternatives. Jake and Emma found themselves with a backpack each, $200 in transitional assistance, and nowhere to go. They'd tried everything the system offered: job training programs with 6-month waiting lists, housing assistance with requirements they couldn't meet, educational programs that demanded addresses they didn't have. Every door that opened seemed to close just as quickly, usually due to bureaucratic red tape or insufficient funding. Detroit's winter was approaching fast, and the abandoned buildings they'd been using for shelter were becoming dangerously cold. Emma had developed a persistent cough that worried Jake constantly, and he'd noticed her getting thinner despite his efforts to make sure she got the larger portion whenever they managed to find food. They survived on day labor when they could find it, Jake doing construction cleanup for cash under the table, Emma sometimes finding work cleaning offices or helping at food trucks. But work was sporadic, and winter was making outdoor labor even scarcer. The community center had become their lifeline. It offered showers on weekdays, a free meal program on Wednesdays and Saturdays, and a warm place to sit during the day. The staff knew them by name and did what they could to help, but they were overwhelmed with the city's growing homeless population. "I'm scared, Jake," Emma whispered as they huddled together in their latest hideout, an abandoned warehouse on the east side where other homeless people sometimes gathered for warmth. Mrs. Rodriguez from the community center said the shelters are all full until at least January. "What are we going to do when it really gets cold?" Jake pulled his sister closer, trying to share what little warmth they had. Outside, the wind howled through broken windows, and he could see his breath in the frigid air. "We'll figure it out. We always do." But even as he said it, Jake felt the weight of responsibility crushing down on him. He was running out of options, and he could see Emma getting sicker by the day. That's when Jake made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life, or save it. Jake had been watching Marcus for 3 months, ever since he'd first noticed the blind man's regular routine. Every morning at 9:30, Marcus would leave his small apartment building and walk the 6 blocks to the community center. He'd spend an hour there, sometimes talking with staff, sometimes just sitting quietly in the common area. Then he'd walk to the corner market, buy groceries, and return home by noon. What had caught Jake's attention initially was how Marcus paid for things. Always cash, always from a thick leather wallet that looked expensive and well-maintained. In a neighborhood where most people scraped together coins for basic necessities, Marcus's wallet stood out. "There's this blind guy," Jake told Emma the next morning as they watched Marcus make his daily trip to the convenience store. They sat on a bus stop bench across the street, trying to look casual while they observed his routine. "Same route, same time, every day for the past 3 months I've been watching. He always pays with cash, always has a thick wallet." Emma's eyes widened with horror. "Jake, no, we can't steal from a blind person. That's horrible." Jake's jaw tightened. Look at us." He gestured to their dirty clothes, their hollow cheeks, the way Emma's hands shook slightly from cold and hunger. "When was the last time you had a real meal? When did you last sleep somewhere warm? I've watched him. He dresses nice. He's got money. He'll be fine. We need this." Emma stared at her brother, seeing the desperation in his eyes that matched her own hunger pangs. They had tried everything else, begging, looking for work, asking for help at every agency and church in the city. Doors kept closing in their faces, and winter was coming fast. "What if we get caught?" she whispered. "We won't. I've got it all figured out. You create a distraction, drop something, ask for directions. I'll bump into him, grab the wallet, and we're gone. Quick and clean." Emma felt sick to her stomach. Everything they'd been taught, everything they believed about right and wrong, screamed against this plan. But the gnawing hunger, the persistent cough that kept her awake at night, and the thought of another night shivering in an abandoned building made her nod reluctantly. "Just this once, Jake. Just to get us through the winter. We'll pay him back someday when we're on our feet." Jake nodded eagerly, grasping at this rationalization. "Exactly. It's not really stealing. It's borrowing. We'll find him and pay him back with interest once we get stable." But even as they made these plans, both twins felt a weight settling on their souls. They'd never crossed this line before, never taken anything that didn't belong to them. Desperation was forcing them to become people they'd never wanted to be. Over the next week, they refined their plan. Emma would approach Marcus first, creating a distraction by asking for directions, and then accidentally dropping her backpack to scatter its contents. While Marcus was turned toward her voice, Jake would approach from behind, bump into him apologetically, and extract the wallet in the confusion. They practiced on strangers in crowded areas, perfecting their timing and coordination. Emma discovered she was naturally good at looking helpless and lost, skills that made her feel sick, but that might keep them alive. Jake practiced the quick grab, learning to judge the weight and position of objects in people's pockets without them noticing. What the twins didn't know was that Marcus had been aware of them for weeks. His other senses had become incredibly acute since losing his sight 15 years ago, and he'd noticed the same footsteps following him. The whispered conversations that stopped abruptly when he got close. The way the air moved differently when someone was watching him. Marcus had initially assumed they were planning to rob him. He wasn't naive about the dangers of his neighborhood. But instead of avoiding them or calling the police, Marcus found himself intrigued. There was something about their voices, especially Emma's, that stirred a memory he couldn't quite place. Her laugh, on the rare occasions when he heard it, reminded him of someone he'd lost long ago. Through careful listening and discreet inquiries with local shop owners and community center staff, Marcus had pieced together their story. Mrs. Rodriguez at the community center had mentioned the Thompson twins, 17-year-old siblings who'd aged out of the system and were struggling to survive on the streets. The boy was protective and desperate, she'd said, while the girl was gentle and hopeful despite their circumstances. The more Marcus learned about Jake and Emma, the more his heart ached for them. He'd started making anonymous donations to the community center, specifically to fund programs that might help them. The meal program, the shower facilities, the job training initiatives. He'd even arranged for a local hotel to provide emergency housing vouchers, though he'd learned that Jake and Emma were too proud to accept what they saw as charity. Marcus had tried to approach them directly several times, but they always disappeared when he got too close. He'd started to realize that they were planning something involving him, and he'd begun to suspect what it might be. The night before their planned robbery, Marcus sat in his small apartment, holding the photograph he'd carried with him for 16 years, the ultrasound images of his unborn twins. The same twins he'd believed were dead until he'd hired a private investigator 2 years ago and learned the truth. Marcus had moved to Detroit specifically because this was the last known location of Jake and Emma Thompson, the names his children had been given by the state. He'd been searching for them for 6 months, hoping to find them and somehow make amends for all the years he'd lost to grief and self-pity. On the morning Jake and Emma finally made their move, Marcus was ready, but he wasn't ready for what would happen next. Emma approached Marcus as he waited at the bus stop, her heart pounding so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. She'd barely slept the night before, torn between desperation and guilt. "Excuse me, sir, I'm really lost. Could you help me find—" She deliberately dropped her backpack, spilling its meager contents across the sidewalk. A few coins rolled into the street, along with her worn notebook, a half-empty water bottle, and the small stuffed elephant she'd carried since childhood, but would never admit to Jake that she still needed for comfort. "Oh no, I'm so sorry," she exclaimed, crouching down to gather her things. Marcus turned toward her voice, and for a moment, Emma froze. Even through his dark glasses, there was something familiar about his face, something that tugged at a memory she couldn't quite grasp. His bone structure, the shape of his nose, even the way he tilted his head, it all seemed strangely familiar. "It's all right, dear," Marcus said gently, his voice kind despite knowing what was coming. "Where are you trying to go?" As Emma scrambled to collect her belongings, Marcus crouched down to help her, his fingers finding her small notebook. For just a moment their hands touched, and both of them felt an electric shock of recognition that neither could explain. That's when Jake made his move. He approached from behind, just as they'd planned, bumping into Marcus with practiced clumsiness. "Sorry, man, didn't see you there," Jake muttered, his fingers finding the wallet in Marcus's jacket pocket. The leather was expensive and thick with bills, just as Jake had predicted. For a moment, he felt a surge of relief. This would be enough to get them through the winter, maybe even find a small apartment. But Marcus's hand shot out with surprising speed and accuracy, gripping Jake's wrist with a strength that belied his appearance. "I think you have something that belongs to me." Emma scrambled to her feet, panic flooding her system. "Jake! Run, Em!" Jake shouted, trying to pull away from Marcus's grip, but the older man held firm. "Please," Marcus said quietly, his voice holding no anger, only infinite sadness. "Don't run. I think we need to talk." Something in Marcus's tone made Jake stop struggling. Emma, despite every instinct screaming at her to flee, found herself stepping closer instead of running away. "I'm not going to call the police," Marcus continued, his voice gentle but firm. "But I need you to answer some questions. What are your names?" "Why would you want to know?" Jake asked suspiciously, but his voice was shaking. There was something about this man that felt different, familiar in a way he couldn't explain. "Because," Marcus said, reaching into his other pocket with his free hand and pulling out a small, worn photograph, "I think I've been looking for you for 16 years. Emma gasped as she looked at the photo. It was ultrasound images, clearly old and well-handled, dated 17 years ago. Written in faded ink at the bottom were two names, Jake and Emma Chen. That's our names," Emma whispered, her voice barely audible. "But our last name is Thompson. That's what the state gave us when they couldn't find our family." Marcus's hand trembled as he held the ultrasound photos. "Your mother's name was Sarah, Sarah Martinez Chen. She was my wife, and you are my children." The world seemed to stop spinning. Jake felt like he couldn't breathe, like the ground was shifting beneath his feet. "That's impossible. Our parents died in a car accident before we were born. That's what they told us in every foster home, every social worker meeting. They said we were orphans." "Half right," Marcus said, tears streaming down his face behind his dark glasses. "Your mother died in that accident, but I survived. I've been looking for you ever since I got out of the hospital and learned you were alive." Emma's knees gave out, and she sank onto the bench beside Marcus. You're our father?" Marcus slowly removed his dark glasses, revealing the clouded, unseeing eyes underneath. The scars around his eyes told the story of multiple surgeries, of trauma that went far beyond just losing his sight. "The accident that killed your mother? I was driving," Marcus said, his voice breaking. "We just celebrated the biggest success of our lives. Our company had gone public that day, making us billionaires on paper." Sarah was so excited about the charitable foundation she was planning, the programs she wanted to create for children like you've become. He paused, struggling to continue. "I was on the phone with our lawyer, distracted by business when I should have been focused on getting home safely to my pregnant wife. The drunk driver ran a red light, but if I'd been paying attention, maybe I could have swerved. Maybe I could have—" "You can't blame yourself for someone else's drunk driving," Emma said softly, her natural compassion overriding her shock. "I blame myself for everything," Marcus continued. "For the accident, for Sarah's death, for not being there when you were born. The guilt, the grief, losing my sight, the traumatic brain injury. I couldn't handle any of it. I ran away from everything, including my responsibility to find you." Jake stared at this man, his father, with a mixture of rage and desperate hope. "So you just gave up? We've been living on the streets, going hungry, sleeping in the cold, and you've been here the whole time?" "Not the whole time," Marcus said quietly. "I only moved to Detroit 6 months ago when my private investigator finally traced you here. I've been searching for you, hoping to find you. But I didn't know what you looked like as teenagers, what names you were using. All I had were baby photos and hope." Emma's mind was reeling, but pieces were starting to fall into place. The community center donations, the anonymous benefactor who's been paying for the meal programs and shower facilities and job training. That was you, wasn't it? Marcus nodded. "I figured if I couldn't find you directly, maybe I could help make your lives a little easier while I searched." Mrs. Rodriguez mentioned 2 siblings who reminded her of her own children, twins who looked out for each other. I started to hope, but I didn't want to get my hopes up too high. "The hotel vouchers," Jake said suddenly, understanding dawning on his face. "The emergency housing program that started 3 months ago. You've been trying to help us." "I just never imagined you'd find me first by trying to rob me," Marcus said with a sad smile. Jake exploded with 16 years of pent-up anger and pain. "Don't you dare make this about us finding you. We were desperate. We haven't eaten a real meal in 3 days. Emma's been getting sick, and I thought if I could just get enough money for food and maybe a motel room for a few nights." His voice broke, and suddenly he was sobbing. Months of held-back fear, desperation, and the crushing weight of responsibility pouring out of him. "Do you have any idea what it's like, being responsible for another person's survival when you're just a kid yourself? Watching your sister get thinner and sicker and knowing you can't do anything about it? I've been taking care of her since we were babies because there was no one else." Emma wrapped her arms around her brother while tears streamed down her own face. "Why didn't you try harder to find us?" she asked Marcus, her voice small and broken. "We needed you. We've needed you our whole lives. Do you know how many nights I dreamed about having a real family? How many times Jake got beaten up protecting me because we didn't have anyone else?" Marcus reached out tentatively, and when Emma didn't pull away, he gently took her hand. His fingers traced the small scars on her knuckles, evidence of the hard life she'd lived. "Because I was a coward," Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. "Because I blame myself for your mother's death, and I thought you'd be better off without me. Because I was broken, physically, emotionally, mentally, and I didn't think I deserved to be your father after failing to protect your mother and failing to be there when you were born." "But we weren't better off," Jake shouted through his tears. "Do you know what it's like? Going from house to house, never belonging anywhere, never having anyone who really cares if you live or die? We had each other, but we never had a real family. We never had a home." The pain in Jake's voice cut through Marcus like a knife. Every word was true, every accusation justified. He had failed them in the worst possible way, and no amount of money or regret could change that. "Some of the foster homes were okay," Emma said quietly, trying to be fair even through her pain. "But some were Bad. Really bad. And we got separated sometimes, put in different homes, and that was the worst part. Jake would find ways to run away and come find me, and we'd get in trouble, but we couldn't stand being apart. Tell me, Marcus said, steeling himself for the worst. Tell me what happened to you. I need to know what my absence cost you. Over the next hour sitting on that bench while the world moved around them, Jake and Emma told their father about the life he'd missed. They told him about the families who'd taken them in for the monthly payments, but barely fed them. About the foster father who'd made Emma sleep in the basement because her nightmares were disturbing the family. About the time Jake had stolen food from a grocery store when Emma was sick and had spent 2 weeks in juvenile detention. They told him about the good families too. The Washingtons, who'd kept them for 2 years and taught them both to read beyond their grade level before Mr. Washington lost his job and couldn't afford to keep them. The elderly Mrs. Patterson, who'd loved them like grandchildren but had to give them up when her health failed. They told him about learning to be invisible in some homes, indispensable in others. About Jake learning to fix cars and do electrical work because it made him valuable to foster families who needed the free labor. About Emma becoming an expert at household chores and childcare because it kept them together when families needed help with younger children. We learned early that we could only count on each other, Jake said, his anger starting to mix with exhaustion. Emma's the only person who's never left me, never given up on me. She's not just my sister, she's my best friend, my partner, my family. Any relationship you want with us has to understand that. Marcus nodded, understanding completely. You've been each other's family because I wasn't there to be yours. I respect that bond. I'm grateful for it. You kept each other safe when I couldn't. We tried to stay together, Emma added softly. Sometimes the system wanted to separate us because it was easier to place one child than two, especially as we got older. But Jake always found a way back to me. I promised her when we were 7, Jake said, looking at his sister with fierce protectiveness. I promised that whatever happened, we'd always be together. It's the only promise I've ever been able to keep. Marcus stood slowly, reaching into his other pocket. He pulled out a bank card and a thick envelope, both worn from handling. I know I can never make up for the years you suffered, Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. But I want you to know something. Jake, the wallet you took, open it again. Jake, still holding the stolen wallet, opened it with shaking hands. Inside, along with a few bills for daily expenses, was the bank card Marcus had just mentioned and a letter with their names written in careful handwriting. Read the letter, Marcus said softly. Emma took the letter with trembling hands and read aloud. To Jake and Emma, if you're reading this, it means you found me or I found you. This card accesses a trust fund I established the day I learned you were alive. Currently, it contains $1.8 billion plus accumulated interest and investment growth over the past 2 years. It was always meant to be yours, not just the money, but the legacy your mother and I built together. Emma's hands shook so hard she nearly dropped the letter. Billion? With a B? Marcus nodded. Your mother and I built Chen Technologies together. When I lost her, I lost my purpose, but I never lost my love for you. Even when I thought you were dead, I kept the company's profits in trust, hoping that somehow, someday, I'd have a family to share it with again. Jake stood up abruptly, pacing back and forth. So what? You think you can just buy us? Think money fixes 17 years of abandonment? No, Marcus said firmly. Money doesn't fix anything. It won't bring back the birthdays I missed, the Christmas mornings you spent in foster care, the nights you went to bed hungry, the times you needed someone to protect you and no one was there. It won't erase the pain I've caused by being too broken to fulfill my responsibility to you. Emma looked between her father and her brother, her heart breaking for all of them. Jake, he's hurting too. Look at him. Jake turned to really look at Marcus for the first time. He saw a man who had clearly suffered, whose guilt had carved lines of pain into his face, whose hands shook not just from age but from the weight of regret. But there's more, Marcus continued, pulling out a small, battered notebook. I want you to understand, I never stopped thinking about you, never stopped loving you. Even when I thought you were dead, he handed the notebook to Jake. Every day for 16 years, Every single day I wrote you letters. Letters telling you about your mother, about how much she loved you even before you were born. Letters about my regrets, my hopes, my dreams for your future. Letters apologizing for failing you. I wrote them even when I thought you were dead, because it was the only way I could feel connected to you. Jake opened the notebook with trembling hands. Page after page of entries, all addressed to my dear Jake and Emma. Dates going back 16 years. Letters full of love, regret, hope, and heartbreak. Emma read over Jake's shoulder, and soon they were both crying as they read their father's words. Day 1. My precious children, today I learned you might be alive. I don't know where you are or if you're safe, but I want you to know that not a day has passed that I haven't thought about you. Your mother used to talk to you when you were in her belly, telling you about all the places she wanted to show you, all the things she wanted to teach you. I'm going to find you, and I'm going to tell you all those things she never got to say. Day 127. Emma, today I heard a little girl laugh at the park, and for a moment I imagined it was you. I wondered if you laugh like your mother did, with your whole heart, like music. Jake, I wondered if you're protective like I was at your age, if you watch out for your sister the way I should be watching out for both of you. Day 892. I hired another private investigator today, the third one this year. I know the odds are against finding you after all this time, but I can't give up. You're my children, my legacy, the only good thing that came from the best relationship I ever had. I owe it to your mother to find you and make sure you're safe. Day 1-2-47. I dreamed about your mother last night. She was angry with me for giving up, for wallowing in grief instead of taking care of our children. She was right. She was always right. I'm going to do better. I'm going to find you. Day 2-156. 6 years since the accident. I wonder if you even remember that you had parents who loved you. I wonder if anyone has told you about your mother, about how excited she was to meet you, about the nursery she designed with stars on the ceiling, because she wanted you to always reach for something bigger than yourselves. Day 3-91. I got confirmation today that you're alive and lost in the system somewhere. My private investigator found birth records, found evidence that you survived. I'm going to find you. I swear on your mother's memory, I'm going to find you and spend every day for the rest of my life making up for the years I lost to grief and cowardice. Day 4-523. Today marks 12 years since you were born. 12 birthdays I've missed. I bought you presents anyway, kept them in a storage unit, hoping someday I'd get to give them to you. Jake, I got you books about building things, about how machines work. Emma, I got you art supplies and journals. I hope I guessed right about what you might like. Day 5 is 8:32. I moved to Detroit today. A private investigator thinks he has a lead. Jake and Emma Thompson, could that be you? I'm scared and hopeful and terrified that when I find you, you'll hate me for taking so long. But I'd rather have your hate than live another day not knowing if you're safe. Jake's anger began to crack, revealing the hurt underneath. If you loved us so much, why didn't you try harder earlier? Why didn't you fight the system, hire lawyers, demand answers? Because I did, Marcus said, pulling out his phone. His fingers moved expertly across the screen. He'd learned to use voice commands and touch navigation after losing his sight. He showed them a folder labeled Search for Jake and Emma. It contained hundreds of documents, legal papers, private investigator reports, court filings, dead-end leads. I hired 12 different law firms over the years, Marcus continued. I spent over $10 million on private investigators. I filed court petitions, fought the sealed records, demanded answers from every agency involved in your case, but the system protected you from me, just like it was supposed to. Your records were sealed to protect you from potentially unstable relatives. And I was unstable. I was grieving, blind, dealing with traumatic brain injury, depression. Maybe they were right to keep you from me in those early years. Emma felt her heart breaking all over again, but this time it was breaking for her father too. Dad, she whispered, the first time she had ever called him that. Marcus gasped at the word, tears flowing freely down his face. Emma. We've all been broken, she said softly, reaching out to take his hand. We've all been lost, but we found each other now. Jake was still struggling with his anger, but seeing his sister's compassion and reading their father's letters was slowly melting the ice around his heart. I wanted to hate you, he admitted, his voice thick with emotion. When Emma said that word, Dad, I wanted to hate you for not being there all those times we needed a father. You should hate me, Marcus said quietly. I hate myself for failing you. But I can't, Jake continued, his voice breaking, because I can see in these letters that you were suffering too. Because I can see that you never stopped loving us, even when you thought we were dead. Because he looked at his sister, then back at Marcus. Because Emma's right, we've all been lost, and maybe we can figure out how to be a family together. Marcus stood carefully and took a tentative step toward Jake. Son, I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I know I can't undo the damage or bring back the years we lost, but if you'll let me, I'd like to spend the rest of my life trying to be the father you deserve from the beginning. Jake looked at this man, his father, and for the first time in his life, he wasn't carrying the weight of protecting his family alone. For the first time, someone was offering to protect him. I don't even know how to be someone's son, Jake admitted, his voice small and vulnerable, in a way Emma hadn't heard since they were children. I don't know how to be someone's father, Marcus replied honestly, but maybe we can learn together. Emma stood up and gently took both of their hands, bringing them together. We don't have to figure it all out today. We just have to start. Marcus pulled both of his children into a hug, the first hug they'd shared since they were in their mother's womb. Jake resisted for a moment, 16 years of self-reliance warring with his desperate need for family, then melted into his father's arms, 17 years of longing and pain pouring out of him. I'm sorry, Marcus whispered over and over, his arms tight around both of his children. I'm so sorry I failed you. I'm sorry you suffered. I'm sorry I wasn't there to protect you, to love you, to be your father when you needed me most. We're here now, Emma said through her tears. We're together now. I'm scared, Jake admitted, his voice muffled against his father's shoulder. I'm scared this isn't real, that you'll disappear, that something will go wrong, and we'll be alone again. I'm not going anywhere, Marcus promised fiercely. I've spent 16 years looking for you. Now that I've found you, nothing in this world could make me leave you again. Over the next several hours, sitting on that bench at the bus stop where their lives had collided, Marcus, Jake, and Emma began to build the foundation of their relationship. They talked about Sarah, the mother and wife they'd all lost in different ways. Marcus told them stories about her pregnancy, about how she would talk to them constantly, playing classical music and reading to them through her belly. She was convinced you could hear her, Marcus said with a soft smile. She'd put headphones on her stomach and play Mozart, convinced it would make you smarter. She read Harry Potter to you every night, all 7 books twice through during her pregnancy. Emma gasped. That's why I love those books so much. I've read them dozens of times, and I never knew why they felt so familiar. She wanted to name you after characters from literature, Marcus continued. Jake was going to be Jacob, after Jacob Marley from A Christmas Carol. She said he was a character who learned to warn others about the mistakes he'd made. Emma was going to be Emma after Jane Austen's Emma. Strong, intelligent, caring, but not afraid to speak her mind. Jake smiled for the first time that day. She sounds amazing. She was, Marcus said. She would have loved the people you've become. Strong, loyal, protective of each other. She always said the most important thing we could teach you was that family takes care of family, no matter what. They talked about practical things too. Getting the twins proper identification with their real last name, enrolling them in school, setting up college funds, and learning to live together as a family. Jake asked the hard questions. What if we can't make this work? What if the damage is too deep? What if I can't learn to trust you, or Emma gets tired of having to help us figure out how to be father and son? Marcus answered honestly. Then we'll figure that out too. But I'm not giving up on us again. Whatever challenges we face them together. If you need space, I'll give you space. If you need time, I'll give you time. But I'm not disappearing from your lives again. Emma had her own concerns. What if people find out about the money? What if they treat us differently? What if we can't handle having so much when we've had so little for so long? We'll be careful, Marcus assured her. The money's there for your security and your future, but it doesn't have to define you. You get to choose who you want to be. We can live modestly, give most of it away, use it to help other kids like you, whatever feels right to you. I want to help other foster kids, Emma said immediately. Kids who are aging out of the system with nowhere to go. Kids like we were this morning. Jake nodded. And I want to make sure what happened to us doesn't happen to other families. There has to be a better way to keep families together, or at least to help kids find their families when they get separated. Marcus felt a surge of pride. Despite everything they'd been through, his children had emerged with compassion and a desire to help others. Sarah would have been so proud. So what happens now? Emma asked practically. We don't even have a place to live, real identification, or any of the things normal people have. Marcus reached into his jacket and pulled out a set of keys. I bought a house 6 months ago when I moved here. It's in a nice neighborhood, good schools nearby if you want to finish high school or go to college. It has 4 bedrooms because I hoped that maybe someday I'd find you and you'd want to stay with me, at least until you figured out what you wanted to do with your lives. Jake took the keys, feeling their weight, both physical and metaphorical. You really never gave up. Never, Marcus said firmly. Even when everyone told me to, even when it seemed impossible, I never stopped believing I'd find my children. Emma looked at her brother. Jake, we could finish high school. We could go to college. We could have a real home. Jake nodded slowly. But we do this as a family. All of us together, figuring it out as we go. No secrets, no running away when things get hard. Marcus smiled. The first genuine smile he'd had in 16 years. I'd like that more than anything. There's going to be legal stuff, Jake said practically. Getting our names changed back, getting proper ID, dealing with the trust fund, and we need to be careful. If this gets out to the media, it'll be chaos. Marcus nodded. I've already talked to my attorney about the legal aspects. Once we do DNA tests to confirm what we all know, we can start the process of restoring your legal identity. As for the media, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. I want to learn about Mom, Emma said softly. Everything about her, what she was like, what she loved, what her dreams were. I have photo albums, videos, her journals, Marcus said. I kept everything. I'll share all of it with you. And I want to learn about the business, Jake added. About what you and Mom built together. Maybe I could help run it someday. Marcus felt his heart swell with pride. Your mother would love that. She always said the company was meant to be a family legacy. The house Marcus had bought was everything he'd promised. Warm, safe, comfortable, and most importantly, filled with the sound of family. Jake and Emma had enrolled in the local high school where they were excelling academically for the first time in their lives. The stability of having a home, regular meals, and someone who cared about their future had transformed them both. But the transformation went deeper than just their circumstances. Having a father who believed in them, who was proud of their accomplishments and there to support them through challenges, had allowed both twins to discover parts of themselves they'd never had the luxury of exploring. Jake had discovered a talent for business and economics, often helping Marcus manage their investments and the charitable foundation they'd established. He'd also started seeing a therapist to work through the trauma of their childhood and to learn how to be part of a family instead of just a protector. Emma had thrown herself into art and writing, finding ways to express the emotions and experiences that had shaped their unique journey. She'd also become the family's emotional center, helping Jake and Marcus navigate their new relationship and learn to communicate their feelings. Marcus had found his purpose again in being a father. The depression that had consumed him for 16 years had lifted, replaced by a sense of meaning and hope he'd thought he'd lost forever. He'd started working with the business again, this time with the goal of creating something his children could be proud of. They'd established new routines and traditions. Sunday morning breakfasts where they planned their week, evening walks where Marcus told them more stories about their mother, family movie nights where Jake and Emma introduced their father to all the things he'd missed during his years of isolation. The money had allowed them to help others too. They'd established the Sarah Martinez Chen Foundation, focused on finding missing children, supporting teenagers aging out of foster care, and preventing family separation. It was Jake's idea. He wanted to make sure no other kids went through what they had experienced. But the real transformation wasn't in their circumstances. It was in their hearts. Marcus had learned that healing was possible, that love could overcome even the deepest guilt and regret. Jake had learned that strength didn't always mean carrying everything alone, that accepting help and love didn't make him weak. Emma had discovered that hope wasn't foolish. Sometimes it was the thing that saved you. On the anniversary of the day they found each other, the three of them returned to that same bus stop. It had become a family tradition, returning to the place where their story really began. The neighborhood looked different now. The community center had expanded its programs with funding from their foundation. The abandoned warehouses where Jake and Emma had once slept were being converted into transitional housing for homeless youth. The corner market where Marcus had shopped for years now displayed a small plaque, thanking the Chen family for their contributions to the community. "Do you ever regret it?" Marcus asked his children as they sat on the familiar bench. "Taking that wallet, I mean. Do you ever wonder how different things might have been if you hadn't been desperate enough to try to rob me?" Jake and Emma exchanged a look, the kind of silent communication that twins share, but now enriched by the security of having a family. "Never," Jake said firmly, "because it brought us to you, because it gave us a family and a future we never could have imagined." Emma nodded in agreement. Besides, maybe it wasn't really stealing. Maybe it was just taking back something that was already ours. Marcus laughed, pulling both of his children close. "Maybe you're right. Maybe you were just taking back your father." Jake looked at his father seriously. "You know what the weird part is? I used to have dreams about having a dad, but I never imagined he'd be someone I'd have to steal from first. And I used to dream about finding my children," Marcus replied, "but I never imagined they'd find me by robbing me." Emma giggled. "So basically, we're all terrible at imagining how our lives would actually turn out." As they sat together watching the sunset, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. The accident that had seemed like the end of everything had actually been the beginning of something new. The guilt and grief that had driven him away from life had ultimately led him back to the most important thing in his life, his children. The wallet that Jake had stolen that rainy morning in Detroit sat framed on Marcus's desk at home now, not as a reminder of a crime, but as a symbol of the moment when three broken people found each other and began to heal. "I have something to tell you both," Marcus said as they prepared to head home. "I've been thinking about stepping down as CEO of Chen Technologies." Jake looked surprised. "Dad, you love that company. You and Mom built it together." "Exactly," Marcus said. "Your mother and I built it to be a family legacy. Jake, you've shown incredible aptitude for business. Emma, your artistic vision could revolutionize our user interface design. I think it's time to start transitioning the company to the next generation." Emma's eyes widened. "You want us to run Mom's company?" "I want you to make it your own," Marcus corrected. "Take what your mother and I built and make it into something that reflects your values, your vision for the future. Use it to change the world the way you want to change it." Jake felt the weight of that responsibility, but also the excitement of possibility. "What about school, college?" "You'll figure it out," Marcus said confidently. "You've overcome everything life has thrown at you so far. You can handle balancing education with gradually taking on more responsibility at the company." As they walked home together that evening, Marcus between his two children, he realized that sometimes the most precious things in life come to us in the most unexpected ways. Sometimes what looks like loss is actually the first step toward finding everything you never knew you needed. The blind man had found his sight, not in his eyes, but in his heart. The lost twins had found their home, not just in a house, but in each other and in the Father who had never stopped looking for them. And together they had discovered that love really can heal anything, if you are brave enough to let it. Their story had started with desperation and ended with hope. It had begun with theft and ended with restoration. Most importantly, it had transformed three strangers connected by blood into a real family connected by love, forgiveness, and the unshakable belief that together they could overcome anything. The future stretched out before them now, bright with possibility. There would be challenges, learning to be a family, dealing with the pressures of wealth, managing a global company, continuing their charitable work. But they would face those challenges together, as a family should. And sometimes late at night, when he couldn't sleep, Marcus would hold that old wallet and remember the morning when his children came home to him, not as the successful businessman he'd once been, not as the broken man he'd become, but as the father he was always meant to be. In the end, that's what family really is. Not perfection, but the willingness to help.